Hi, Rick. Wick, how are you, my brother? Nice to see you. Hope you're doing well. I bet the weather's beautiful in Denver, I hope. I'm going to get started in about 2 minutes, just as soon as the audience builds. It is hot in Florida. Hot, hot, hot. We're going to get going here in just about 2 minutes, but I just want to have the audience build just a little bit. Hi, Lori. Nice to see you, beautiful. How are you, my friend? Hello, Estella. Nice to see you. Welcome. I'm going to get started here in just a moment. How are you today? Everybody is good, I hope. All right, I'm going to check the time here. Sorry for the mini earthquake on the phone. I got 1 more minute and then I'm going to go, okay? Very good, very good. Lori, how's that beautiful baby you've got floating around out there? You guys been having some fun, I hope. Jasper the squirrel and I have been having a delightful time. I'm excited to talk today. Sorry, I'm fighting a little bit of something, and I'm eating zinc pills like it's going out of style, and it is the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. Ugh. Terrible. Terrible, terrible. But the world is beautiful, and everything is good today. I hope if you're living, you too, Estella. Where do you live? Alrighty. Yeah. Okay, guys, we're going to get going now. All right, so here's what I want you to do. Hi, everybody. Everybody, nice to see you. Hi, Tommy. Nice to see you. Hi, April. Good morning or afternoon or whatever time it is, wherever you are. All right, so here's what we're going to talk about. This is day 9 of the unconditional relationship. And if you've watched any of the preceding videos, you have noticed that I talk about this thing, this idea of abandoning all your conditions, judgments, and expectations. And so, and how they really limit unconditional love. Now, here's the thing. They limit unconditional love because they are rules that you have embedded in your life that keep you safe. Your conditions, judgments, and expectations come from your limitations of thought. They're derived from fear. Now, the flip side of this coin, though, is, hello, Kim Brady. The flip side of this coin is, how do you establish a relationship without some type of conditions? Or, well, actually, there's no grounds for any judgments or any expectations, but how do you establish a relationship on solid footing so that people know the rules of engagement, essentially? So that's what I want to talk about today. And, you hear in the self-help world this term boundaries thrown all about. Here's the way that I frame this, okay? A boundary is really just a condition that you're unwilling to move on. They're your absolutes. And bear in mind, I think you should have absolutes in the relationship. And I think that the best, most unconditional relationship should have a clear-cut understanding of what those absolutes are of each partner. And so what I've done is, I believe that those standards, those boundaries, that we establish actually create safety for unconditional love to exist. So that's what I want to talk about today, is how do you create safety in your relationship so unconditional love can exist? Bearing in mind that when you're in the context of relationship, you will be healing your wounds. You will be walking through your processes of becoming more evolved divine essence, stepping into your divine essence, understanding your sense of divinity. And but how do you do that when two people are really merged together in a relationship, but they are on two different spiritual journeys? Because none of us are on the same journey. We're all on different journeys. And so what I have done is made a list here of some standards that I'd like you to think about. Now, if you're looking for the love of your life, this would be a really good exercise to dig into this, ask yourself these questions, and then the subset of this is to ask yourself, why is that a standard for me? Why do I believe that? Why is that so important to me? Okay? So grab your pen, buckle your seatbelt, grab your journal, and here we go, all right? Now, in the context of a good unconditional relationship, I believe that you should have standards around self-awareness. Okay, go with me on this. What if when you connect with your spouse or partner, or you're connecting with somebody that you're dating, you were really clear on what your goals of self-awareness are, and you seek to understand what their goals of self-awareness are? You know, because if you're on two different paths, one of you is accelerating towards self-awareness, and one of you is running straight toward the river denial and don't want to look at that, they don't want to look at themselves at all, then you could have a problem. So what if you had a conversation and you said, you know, I'm on a spiritual process, in a process, on a journey, and for me to become more self-aware, I need to spend time by myself. I need the opportunity to write. I need good conversations. But bear in mind, that all doesn't have to come from you, spouse or partner, or romantic inclination or friend, but just be aware that I'm on a journey of self-awareness, and this is what it looks like. Okay, so I want you to make some standards for yourself. What is your self-awareness standard? What do they look like? What do they stand for? Why are you doing them? And really think about how you're going to grow most effectively in your process. Okay, so for me, for instance, one of my self-awareness standards is the ability to journey into my own soul when I choose to. Okay, now here's the thing. We've never really talked about this, but I think if I were going to do it again, I would say when I am writing, when I am sitting quietly, if I'm listening to my Deva Premal music, if I'm centering and grounding, if I'm in nature, likelihood is that I am doing some self-awareness work. How do you, my friend, do your self-awareness work? So that's the first area I want you to really think about, is what are the standards that you want to set for yourself around self-awareness, and in the process of engaging with someone else, understanding what their standards of self-awareness are. What's important to them? Do they want to read? Do they want to go to workshops? Do they need to be a part of a support group? Do they need to journal and meditate and ground? Get to know that person around the issue of self-awareness, okay? Now, the second standard I think that good relationships need are communication standards. And let me tell you this, all right? How many times have I heard someone say, oh, I'm in a relationship, but he's a non-communicator, or she's a non-communicator, or they just yap all the time? If you notice with people that I've done therapy with, there's always incongruence around the way they communicate. Now, I think that's deliberate design, because if we were all together with people that communicate just like us, we would spin ourselves into a tailspin. If I had a talker like me in my life, my God, you better strap on your seatbelt, because we would talk a hole all the way to China. So what are your communication standards? Okay? Are you a talker? Are you a muller? Do you like to process things? Do you like to have short, intermittent conversations? Are you very matter of fact? Do you need to talk about your deep, profound feelings, or can you take things at surface, at face value? What are those communication standards that you have? And I'm going to add a little suggestion here as well. As a couple, I think it is absolutely critical. Hi, Diane. I love you too, baby. As a couple, or even in a friendship, I think it's absolutely critical that you establish how and when you're going to communicate. One of the best things a couple can do is say, hey, every Saturday morning, we're going to have coffee together between 9 a.m. and 10 p.m., and we're going to touch base. We're going to see how the world is, what's going on, what you're struggling with, what you're excited about. That keeps a couple in sync. Far too often what happens with couples is that they don't dial in on how they communicate, and so one person adapts to the grunts, the grunter adapts to the yapper, and all of a sudden there's no communication happening. And if someone says to you, I'm not a communicator, run for the fucking hills. Excuse me, I know that's blunt. Run for the hills, because we live in a world of communication, and when somebody says they are not a communicator, that simply means they don't want to communicate the way you want or need. So that's a point of negotiation. Okay, can I have 30 minutes every Saturday just so that we can be on the same page? Would it be better for us to send a weekly update email on the status of life and things that we need to be? Because here's the thing about a relationship. You're on a journey together. If you were navigating the waters on a sailboat and one of you was running a certain type of sail and the other one was running the rudder, if you're not communicating in that process, there's no telling where that sailboat's going to end up. So set your standards of communication. How much, when, and how. Okay? Now, here's the third standard that I think good relationships should be based on, and those are time standards. Let me give you an example. If opposites attract, let's say you're an extrovert and the other person is an introvert, then if you don't have really clear understanding about how you're going to spend time together, then all of a sudden you're going to fall into a place of feeling needy and clingy or overpowered and consumed. So what if you were just to simply say, hey, I'm a fairly alone person. I like my quiet time. If we sit and watch a movie, this is what could happen. But just know, if you want to spend one full day on the weekend with the person, communicate that. If you need to be up underneath each other every single day, communicate that, because it's a process of negotiation. So what are your time standards? And I want you to think about your own time standards for yourself. How much time do you need to be alone? How much time do you want to be alone? I'll give myself as an example. I need an enormous amount of alone time, a lot of alone time. And so to play it out for you with some of my friends, they know if Trey goes into his hole, which some of my friends give me grief about this, but they know if I go into my hole, that means that I'm doing some processing, I'm thinking, I'm working on a project, I'm doing something, and I might disconnect communication to some degree, but just know that I'm going to come back, all right? I'm going to come back at some point. Thank you, Estella. If I have a friend, for instance, there was a period where, I'll just give you the example. Liz and I work very closely together. We communicate almost every day, 3 or 4 or 5 times a day about business and life and relationships and all sorts of things. But there came a period a couple of months ago where she had a whole lot of stuff going on and I had a lot of stuff going on. We both went into our holes, but because we didn't really communicate about it and our friendship wasn't that developed, I mean, it's a very solid friendship, but we just don't know each other that deeply, then all of a sudden I began to sit and think, why is she ghosting me? And so I just picked up the phone. I said, hey, are you ghosting me right now? Oh, not at all, Trey. I'm just doing some work on myself. Great. Go, friend. Do what you need to, and I'll see you when I see you. Think about that. I'll see you when I see you. That's beautiful, okay? So you've got your self-awareness standards, your communication standards, your time standards. Now let's get down to the big enchiladas. In the context of relationships, we have all sorts of standards around fidelity if you're in a romantic relationship. But let me tell you where most people's standards of fidelity come from. They come from what their parents taught them to be right, moral, and ethical. They might have learned their fidelity standards based on some wound in their relational experience. Anyway, people say, for instance, I've had lots of couples say to me, my number one absolute is if he ever screws around on me, then I will leave him in a hot minute. Okay, do you really mean that? Do you really mean that? Because what that is that's a hard line, rigid standard. Now, if that's an absolute for you, then you better communicate that absolute. And here's the bottom line, my friends. If that's an absolute around fidelity, then you sure as shit better stand on that as a promise. None of this wishy-washy bullshit where you say one thing and do something different, because that creates fear in your relationship. So I want you to think about standards around fidelity. Can someone have somebody to play with on the side? Are they exclusively with you? Is it exclusively monogamous? Is it open? Is it expansive? Is it a communication process where you might have somebody else play with you? And here's the key. You have the ability to define it the way you want to. And there is no right or wrong. But here's why I hit this ball so hard around fidelity. That's where an enormous amount of judgment comes, right? Enormous amount of judgment. You think about the friends you have, and if your husband screws around with you or kisses a girl at the bar because he got drunk and got stupid, you're going to have 7 or 8 friends. Well, somebody's mowing the street. Would you believe it? You're going to have a number of friends that come forward and say, oh, you got to kick his ass. You got to leave him right now. Well, all they're doing is imposing their fidelity standards on your relationship. So I want you to really think about that. Are you kidding me? These lawn men. Crazy. Anyway, back to the story, all right? The rule that you hold around fidelity is your right to choose. And in the context of a relationship, you better be dialed in on that. Because if one person is operating on another frame of reference, then you are destined for trouble. Destined for trouble. Okay, here's the next big one. Financial standards. Who's making money? What are the contributions? How are you going to split it? Is it managed on a bank account? Do you have an equal contribution? Is it an unequal financial contribution, but other things? And I'm not trying to transactionalize your relationship, but I am saying that if you don't talk about money, and if you don't have some standards about how you're going to engage around money, then money becomes a tool for power. It becomes a tool for control. How do you want to spend money? What are your priorities of spending money? What do you want to spend money on? How do you want to, I'll give you an example. I don't own a car. Now that's deliberate because I figured out that I was spending almost $700 a month to boast my ego. And then I did some calculations and I realized that I could take Uber or Lyft, and in 1 month alone I saved $600. So when I aggregate that out over a year period, that's $6,000 or $7,000 that I'm saving. Now, I'm willing to sacrifice not having that instant independence of a car because I want the ability to take that $7,000 and travel through Europe or South America or some other place. On the other side of the fence, my friend Eric feels trapped without a car. And if he doesn't have a car, it really limits the way he sees himself in the world. And so his priority is to get a car. My priority is to not have a car. If we were in the context of a romantic relationship, that would be fertile ground for a challenge. But the reality is, you have your choice about money. I have my choice about money. And let's make it happen together. Far too often, one spouse, one partner, or one aspect of the relationship gives a different contribution financially, and that creates fertile ground for hostility, resentment, difficulty, and challenge. So really think about, what do you want to spend money on? How do you want to spend money? What does money mean to you? Are you on a career trajectory? For me, I want my life to be freedom. My number one priority is freedom of time and money. I want to be able to do what I want to do, when I want to do it, however I want to do it. And I'm willing to sacrifice not buying fancy clothes, not having a fancy car, if I know that I can take a trip to Europe. So think about your own financial standards. And in the context of your relationship, you better be really clear on who's contributing what, valuing things that are non-monetary, really thinking about what that contribution is and how it all works. Okay? Now, that goes along with another standard, and that is your shared responsibility standards, right? Now, think about it this way. When was the last time you walked into the kitchen, you saw that the person that you're living with didn't do the dishes, and you just got yourself all Twitter-pated for a minute, right? Guess what? You chose to do that. What if you had some standards around shared responsibilities? On Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, you're going to do the dishes. On Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, I'm going to do the dishes. On Sunday, we're going to let them pile up. This idea that the dishwasher has to be loaded a certain way, or the house has to be vacuumed a certain way. Who's going to take care of the lawn? Who's going to take care of the inside? Who's going to clean the shower every month, or 6 in my case? So I just want you to think about those shared responsibility standards, and especially if you have children and navigating those waters of shared custody. If you're in a divorce situation, for instance, then how are you going to navigate those standards of responsibility? And here's the thing. It's very, very simple if you communicate about it. If you know what your standards are, if you know what their standards are, then you can collaborate and meet in the middle. The problem relationships have is they lose the ability to collaborate and meet in the middle. And all of these standards that I'm laying out for you are really just to give you the grounds to create safety in your relationship so that you can communicate better, so you can mitigate fear in your relationship, and you can be more expansive and open to unconditional love. Okay, now let me get down to the big one. Woohoo! This is my favorite part to talk about. And that's around sex and intimacy, right? Now let's face it. And I'm not talking about screwing around with your friends, but however, if you want to do that, just negotiate it. Just negotiate it, you know? And if that bothers you that I say that, then you're a 1950s housewife and you might want to rethink your shit, okay? I'm giving you a hard time. But sex and intimacy, how do you feel most intimate? What is intimacy to you? And in my opinion, intimacy is about when you're feeling most connected to the other person. So communicate what connection feels like. For instance, connection for me is not about the big wiggle. I mean, the big wiggle is fantastic, but that's not the most connected thing for me. The more connected thing to me would be to sit intimately, have a beautiful meal, a nice glass of wine or 17, and talk about the journey of life and soulful things and joyful opportunities and growing together. That is better than the big wiggle all day long, right? But on the flip side of the coin, if you have a real high libido and you just need to pound it out, then maybe you should be able to say to your spouse or partner, hey, this is how I'm feeling right now. Let's just pound it out. And I hope that doesn't sound crude. Or, this is how I'm feeling right now. Maybe we can hold each other and watch TV. Or, this is how I'm feeling right now. It'd be wonderful if we just had some intimate touch right now. Why do couples not talk about that stuff? Because guess what? When you hop in the bedroom, guess who's showing up? Your mother, your father, your grandfather, your grandmother, their mother, their father, grandfather, grandmother, all their past relationships, all your past relationships, and all of the sudden you have about 17 different people communicating in your head right there in the moment. Now let me drill that. Oh, Diane, you nailed it. It's about emotional, intellectual, spiritual intimacy. And when you get that trifecta, that's where intimacy really flourishes. That's where it's beautiful. Far too often, men, and this might sound somewhat sexist, but I think it's the way that men and women are socialized differently, first of all. And second of all, if you look back at a very, historically, the way that where we came from. Men, we came as hunters and gatherers, conquerors and dominators. We had to. We're cavemen, right? And women were responsible for nurturing and taking care of the living, if you will. Now, we do not have to live in those same roles, but I do think there's an element of primacy to the way men and women differ in the way they think. For instance, men think about the field goal, right? You hop in the sack and it's like, okay, I gotta go. And 2.5 minutes later, the guy is done and the woman is sitting there saying, What the heck happened? What the heck happened? Leave me hanging, bitch? Hell no. Right? So, instead of just tolerating that, what if you had conversations about that? What if you talked about your different levels of libido? What if you knew the patterns? What if you had a little sticker on your dishwasher that said, hot and ready, or stay the hell away, and you just flipped it, and that person had a visual indication that that might be a day that you could do the big wiggle, do a little kissing and giggling, right? Instead, we leave sex and intimacy up to surprise. And I'm not saying take the surprise out of it. I'm saying communicate more about it. How do you feel connected? What is intimacy for you? Which parts of your body are most sensualized? What type of touch turns your crank and gets you wanting to go off like a rocket? What makes you feel incredibly safe and comforted? What turns you on a primal level, make you want to drop the trapeze down and swing by your toenails? Why do we not talk about that stuff? Because we have stories about it that say there's shame there. I'll give you another example. When you think about sex in general, when you really get down to the act of sex, penile vaginal containment, penile anal containment, whatever scientific term you want to use for it, copulation, fellatio, I don't care, right? When you really get right down to it, if you dig deeply enough into your thoughts around sex, you'll discover that you have all sorts of stories around what is masculine, what is feminine, what is submissive, what is dominant, what is loving, what is unloving. I'll give you a funny example. Now this was, and I'm going to do a whole comedy routine on this business, right? So this summer I took a road trip to Colorado with a 76-year-old straight woman who is widowed and had been a caregiver for 30 years, right? I was with a 65-year-old gay man who's been out for about 5 years, okay? And then me, right? We boarded this gray motorhome. Took 5 or 6 days to drive to Denver, and in every stop that we had, we would talk about something really interesting. We talked about life, we talked about literature, and in the evenings we found ourselves sitting by a fire pit somewhere, and not uncommonly we would talk about sex or relationships. And so one night we were talking about sacred touch and how people feel most connected. And I was intimating about a funny camp that I went to a couple of months ago, and I was telling my friends that there are certain people in the BDSM community who see touch much more differently than an 83-year-old straight woman. I'll give you an example, right? I'd met this couple that were into some fairly extreme pain play. It's called impact play. Basically, it's using flogging devices and whips and different things like that. And that is part of their sexual expression. And so as I was talking about this, my female friend looked at me and she said, there's nothing loving about that. And I said, well, help me understand that, because it's based on connection, it's based on communication, it's based on trust, it's based on mutual consent. What's unloving about it? And she said something to the effect of, well, you know, true intimacy, and I'm paraphrasing, but basically her perspective was that sacred touch was really nothing. It had to be caressing and holding and being gentle and kind and loving, spooned up in a bed, as opposed to being suspended by your dingo hanging from a tree. And I know that's an extreme example, but the point is that we have a range of sexual expression, and we have a range of things that turn us on, from music to hot wax to penetration to pouring hot water on you. I don't care what it is, right? And so with your relationships, let's have a really candid conversation about sex. What turns you on? What gets you going? What causes you fear? Do you know, give you an example. If someone ever were to put their hands around my throat, that would trigger me. It doesn't any longer, but for a long period of time, that would trigger me into a fight or flight place. your spouse, your partner, the person you're deeply and intimately connected to, needs to know about you and how you manage your body and what feels good, and you need to know what feels good for them. And then if you get right into that zone, you can be really experimentative and playful, and you can throw all the rules out about grandma and say, let's just throw out some lubrication and see what happens. Now, if that offends you, that's not my intention. But what I'm asking you to do from a sexual standpoint, and it's really two things: sex and intimacy. And maybe sex and intimacy go together for you in the same act, and maybe they don't. Maybe your sex is just pounded out hard and radical, and your intimacy is being able to look across the room and know that that person's on the journey with you. Or maybe you have that kundalini experience sexually where you're merging your energy and it is flowing around and there are no rules, and it is just this beautiful, pure expression of something really dynamic and great. Whatever it is for you, talk about it. Set some standards for it. Help your spouse or partner understand. And if you decide to have a friends with benefits kind of situation with somebody that you find attractive and interesting, then communicate about it. Okay, so self-awareness, communication, time, fidelity, finances, shared responsibilities, sex and intimacy. And now let me propose an interesting idea. What if, and I'm not trying to transactionalize the relationship at all. What I'm trying to do is cut through all the clutter. And by the way, as a therapist, do you know most often people come for marriage and family therapy because of communication problems, sex problems, or money problems? And I'm just giving you a clear-cut roadmap on how to solve some of those problems on the front end. By the way, this little message should be given to everybody you know that's about to get married or about to partner up, because it cuts through the clutter and it allows the space for unconditional love to grow. Remember, it's about stepping out of your wounds and stepping into possibility. But here's the crazy thought. What if you committed to terms of renewal in your relationship? Now, I understand that in the Christian or the Judeo-Christian tradition, we say we make a marriage covenant with God. And I understand all of that. And if that's your belief system, fantastic. That's great. But here's the interesting thing. Those rules came out of historical perspective where a man owned a woman. There was a dowry provided. It was a contract. It was, and so if you think for a moment that you're held by a contract, that's okay. But if you want to be differently expansive about that, then I invite you to consider terms of renewal. What if a couple said to each other, you know, we've been together for a year, let's get together for a weekend and talk about if we're going to do another year? Or what if in the starting of a relationship, you touched base every 3 months and said, how's it going for you? How are we growing together? How's your soul evolving? How can I improve my experience, not to change for you, but what do you need from me so that you can grow better? Because ultimately you have a choice. So I'm a big believer in terms of renewal, because oftentimes we get in a relationship and then we just feel like we're stuck. And then we have to do something to blow the bridge up when we feel stuck. That's not cool. So just talk about it on the front end. All right, let me tie a bow around this. What I'm advocating for is clear and honest self-expression. Radical honesty with your friends, your spouse, your partner. Radical honesty. Total vulnerability and authenticity. None of this mamby-pamby halfway bullshit. If you're going to get in, show up and show up well. And when you're a dumbass, claim it and take responsibility for it and then make it right. None of this pattern where this person dances this way and this person dances that way. You know, here's the thing. All of the unseens in your relationship are where your need for control lie. Now, let me put your brain around that one. When you don't have a standard set for these different things, when you don't have a clear-cut understanding of the boundaries that you hold and the boundaries that your spouse or partner or friends hold, for that matter, then inevitably what will happen is someone will cross the line. And then if you cross the line, you've got to fix it. So what if you did your relationships differently and you said, let's just establish the lines? Going back to my friendship with Liz, I've said very clearly, if I'm going to go into my little hole, don't worry about it. It has nothing to do with you. I've just got to do some processing. We have a clear-cut understanding about how we communicate. No lies. Direct honesty. Direct in-the-moment communication. And if it's hard, we stay the process. We have clear-cut anyway, you understand. In your romantic partnerships, it's even more important. But bottom line, if you can establish standards for your relationship. Now, these are not rules, because a rule says it can never be broken, but the standards are the elements on which communication occur. Okay? Now, I want to push one thing too. The more rigid you are in your perspective, the more constrained you will be. The more rigid you are in your perspective, the more constrained you will be. All right? Now think about that. And as you continue to grow together, what you're seeing is that today's discussion is really about you becoming very self-aware before you engage with someone else. And by the way, you know, most people in the courting phase will try to sniff around some of these standards. But what if you just came right out with it and you said, this is what I really think, this is what I believe, this is what's important to me, and how do you feel about that, and what's your perspective, and help me understand how you see the world. And then you make a decision. That's where it comes down to. You make a decision of whether or not you want to engage. Lock and load or don't. But don't get yourself in a shitty situation that you then have to extract out of. Or have a situation where you can have a term of renewal. Okay, bottom line, my friends. Your conditions, judgments, and expectations limit unconditional love. Your standards create knowledge, which gives you the framework for interacting in the most loving way possible. And here's my challenge. Do some digging around this stuff. Deep digging around this stuff. Ask yourself, why do I believe that? Where does that belief come from? Do I have to believe that? Right? Do I have to believe that? And then engage and communicate. And if you're in a reconciliatory place with someone in your life, I would strongly encourage you to take this lesson today and plan a weekend retreat with that person and talk about it. Dig into it. Explore it. And by the way, if I've struck a chord with you today on some level, Liz and I are going to do a full relational retreat. I think it's going to be in the high country in Colorado in June or July. And we're going to pull together a group of people who are in relationships or seeking relationships, and we're going to talk about the deep, deep stuff that makes unconditional love possible. So if you're interested in that, get on my mailing list at upsizeyoursoul.com, so at least I'll have you in the mix. All right? Leslie Ann, nice to see you. Kim, so nice to have you here. Diane, I love you dearly. And all those others of you that I can't see anymore on the screen, thank you for being with me. I stand in profound gratitude to you, and I wish you well on your journey toward unconditional love. Remember, unconditional love begins first with you before you can extend it to someone else. So do something loving for yourself today. Be well, friends.